Our next speaker is someone who I have admired from afar. I've watched her on Democracy Now! I've read her books. I've paid to go see her speak. And wouldn't you know, I can't believe it, she's sitting in my library, in my hometown library. And we are so honored and privileged to have her. Antonia Juhasz. She is an expert oil industry analyst. The last book that I read was Black Tide. It was the real story of the BP spill in the Gulf. Please read it. You can't put it down, and it'll make you cry. Antonia, thank you so much for coming. I can't believe that you're here. It's just incredible.
Thank you so much for that. Sorry. Extremely kind introduction. How is the sound? Better. I want to encourage the people who are outside to come on in. We've got some room, and we want to make sure you can see. So thank you all so much for being here. My name is Antonia Juhasz, and as you heard, I'm an oil industry analyst. I'm also an investigative journalist. I write articles for places like the Contra Costa Times to the New York Times. I have a new piece on CNN.com that just ran on Friday. I write books. I have just a couple here. The Tyranny of Oil would be useful for you all. Breakdowns of the oil industry, and then Black Tide on the Gulf oil spill, also useful for you all. And I'm going to spend my time giving you basically a breakdown of this oil that Valero would like to bring to your community and why the transport of it is deeply problematic. And just to put in the basics, what Valero wants to do is bring in about a train that carries 100 cars. So we were looking at trains that carry about 10 or 15 cars, right? So these are trains that would carry 100 cars, one of those a day, at least, every single day, 7 days a week, carrying new forms of crude into your community to be refined in your community. And guess what? The main type of oil that we know for sure they want to bring is the same type of oil that blew up the downtown and killed 47 people of Lac Mégantic, Quebec, which opened up our presentation today. So I'm going to do a quick PowerPoint presentation for you to hopefully put all this in context. So this just starting here. So the proposal is to have a lot more crude moving by rail through your town. Why that might be of concern. So the first thing is trains derail. You're familiar with that because they derail here. Here's a recent derailment. My notes aren't there. That's all right.
That was November this year, right on Park.
November.
Yeah.
November 6th.
But I'm going to need them for the rest of them, so I'm going to give you a set cat. Yes, brilliant. All right, November 4th, 2013. Okay, next one. All right, so go back. Sorry. All right, so then now I'm just going through, preparing for this presentation, looking at crude by rail derailments that are happening as I'm preparing. So this is not me pulling together the best and the brightest. This is as they're unfolding as I'm preparing for this talk. February 13th, crude by rail derailment in Pennsylvania, 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of crude oil spilled. This one, New Augusta, Mississippi, January 31st, train carrying oil and other hazardous chemicals derails. Next. January 20th, sorry for that arrow, but if you can see this, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a crude oil rail train derails on a bridge over a river. That's a bridge. That's water underneath. That's the train derailed. We're still just at January 20th. Next one. This is New Brunswick, Canada. I didn't really look very much in Canada. This one is on here because it's very near to the border of the United States with Maine. I could have had a lot more derailments if I also included more in Canada. But this one, 19 cars derail, catch fire, 50 homes evacuated, January 7th. Next one. This is Aliceville, Alabama, November 8th. This is the worst modern crude rail transport derailment because 750,000 gallons of North Dakota Bakken crude spilled from a 90-car train, setting off a series of explosions, and this is a wetlands area, and this is what's left of the train. Next one. So also, there is a very strong chance that tar sand oil from Canada could be brought in. So this is, if you see all that black goop, this is what a tar sand oil train derailment looks like. This is Parks Prairie, Minnesota, March 27th, 2013. 30,000 gallons of crude released when this train derailed. Next one. I think we have a video, a little bit of video for this.
It's like the bombings in Europe.
I think that's good. Probably go back to the slide. So that one, that's Castleton, North Dakota, Bakken crude oil, a train derailment on January 1st, 2013. So this was 480,000 gallons of crude spilled. Now, the important thing to note, this was 1 mile outside of the heart of the town. So this was obviously very almost a lac magnétique right here in North Dakota. The 2,400 residents of the town were forced to evacuate for days. And like lac magnétique, and again, over and over again, we see this oil is so intensely flammable and combustible and burns so hot. And the local communities have absolutely no training. The local firefighters have no training. The oil companies haven't set up special training. They don't know how to deal with the fire. So what do? They let it burn for days and days and days because it's too dangerous. Now that's just not a fire burning. That's an oil fire burning, releasing all of its toxic chemicals into the air for days and days and days and days. Next. All right, so what's going on here? You've been in a community that's had oil moving out of it for a very long time. Why are we suddenly seeing this type of thing happen? So the first is there is significantly more crude being spilled by rail. If you look at this chart, those are years on the bottom and amount of crude going up the top. It starts in 1975. If you look at the amount of crude spilled from 1975 going up to 2013, that's the bottom. 2013 is the end. That line up top is the amount of crude oil spilled by rail in 2013. Now, I'm born in 1970. This is my entire lifetime, just about, right? And in 1 year, more oil was spilled by crude, that's last year, by rail, than in all the other years combined. Something has changed. Next slide. So why is this happening? The first answer is that we are producing and moving a lot more oil by rail. The oil that's being moved, the most that's being moved by rail, is this Bakken crude from North Dakota. We're producing more of it. It's more flammable. It's more dangerous. And the third answer is it's not being regulated. So what's going on? The short answer is that in the language of the oil industry, the age of what they call easy oil, and I put that in quotation marks, is over. The oil that they could get from their perspective easily, more cheaply, lighter oil, easier to refine. That stuff is mostly gone. Now, of course, if you're a community that's ever lived where oil is explored for, or produced, or transported, or refined, or sold, you know there's no such thing as easy oil. But what is left is in places that had previously been deemed too sensitive, too important, too technologically difficult, too expensive to get to, and places that it didn't seem to be worth their while for a lot of reasons. Well, now they have to go after that stuff. What that means is delving deeper and deeper and deeper into the ocean. It means pulling oil out of tar to get it just a teeny bit of oil. It means fighting wars for countries that don't want to give over their oil. It means going into some of the world's last, most sensitive rainforests. And it means trying to get a little bit of oil out of shale rock. So how many of you have heard of fracking for natural gas? How many of you have heard of fracking for oil? Not as many. So this is the same technique. Oh, you're doing the time, sorry. This is the same technique used to get natural gas, but they're using it for oil. And you have to use a ton of chemicals, you have to blast through rocks, you have to use water to get a little bit of oil out of shale rock. One of the places, most important places where this type of technique is being used to get at oil is in North Dakota. And one of the reasons why we're starting to see more of it being gone after is there's at least two reasons. One is that the oil industry was very successful in getting the US Securities and Exchange Commission to change its rules to let it start booking as reserves this very difficult oil to get at. That change, and I can go into it more in questions if you want, but it's important just to throw it out there, brought in the big guns, the big oil companies, the Exxons, the Chevrons, the BPs, the Shells, to start investing in this shale product, oil. And they developed a new technique to go after it called horizontal drilling. And this oil, getting after this type of oil has exploded in one place in particular, North Dakota, where they're getting tons and tons more oil using this frack technique. The problem is it's not your regular old oil, this fracked oil from North Dakota. So next slide. So they're producing dramatically more of this oil out of North Dakota. That's what that statistic is. Moving North Dakota to become, after Texas, the state producing the most oil on land of any state in the United States. North Dakota wasn't even on the map to being number 2. And they have to move it somehow. North Dakota didn't have a lot of oil, so there aren't refineries there, and so they have to move it somehow out of North Dakota to places where there were refineries. And the fastest way to move it is by train. Now that's only part of the answer, though, of why so much more is moving, and that's that other statistic. The other reason why so much more is moving out of North Dakota, and this is really important, so when people say to you, you don't want them to bring more oil here? If they bring more oil here, they'll refine more here, and then they'll sell more gas here, and then your gas prices will go down. Doesn't everybody want their gas prices to go down? Well, yeah. But while we've had this oil boom, have your gas prices gone down? No, in fact, they've gone up. The reason why is because they're producing more here, and then they're exporting it out of the country so that they can sell it in places where they make more money. Because from the oil industry's perspective, the price of oil and the price of gas in particular is way too low, particularly in the United States. They're not making nearly enough money off of gas, and they really want to try and get the price up. So one of the ways they do that is by reducing supply, right? So they're producing more here, but they're also exporting more out of the United States. So next slide. Okay, this is just to point out that we export a ton of product of our refined gasoline out of the Bay Area. In fact, we export more out than any other metro area in the United States. So just because someone's bringing more stuff here absolutely has nothing to do with the idea that your prices will go down here. Next one. Okay, why is this stuff so dangerous? Basically this stuff isn't really, it's not really appropriate to call it crude. It's more like a sort of gasoline, the stuff coming out of North Dakota. It's very volatile and flammable. And this is a chart of just how volatile it is. The North Dakota crude that's going to be moving through here is the top of the list. That's volatility. The rest of these are the oils you're more familiar with. They're much less volatile. Next one. Okay, why is this problematic? Oh boy, I'm definitely out of time. It's not being regulated. So we've had a boom in the transport of oil. It's more dangerous oil, but nobody's regulating it. So here's what the National Transportation Board just said. Oil spill response planning requirements for rail transportation and oil petroleum products are practically non-existent compared with other modes of transport. So they have basically no requirement that Valero or the city or anyone has to prepare for an accident here. So you've got exploding trains, more of them exploding, and no one has to prepare for anything to go wrong here. That's problematic. Next one. The National Transportation Safety Board believes that because conditions have significantly changed with the recent massive growth in crude oil transportation, the regulations are no longer sufficient to mitigate the risks of petroleum product releases in accidents. They can't regulate it. They're telling you, we're not regulating it yet. We can't keep you safe. Therefore, next one, the National Transportation Safety Board says, where feasible, require rerouting to avoid transportation of such hazardous materials through populated and other sensitive areas. Don't run these trains through communities, says the National Transportation Safety Board. Pretty simple, don't run them through communities. Next one. Just in case you think that moving tar sand oil or other products by pipeline is the way to go. Okay, pipelines, first of all, in the United States, are very old. Most of them are 40 years old. And they're not prepared for any of this stuff for sure. But therefore, if you think the answer is we need, well, so here's an old pipeline, first of all. Here's an old pipeline that burst carrying tar sand oil, an Exxon pipeline in a neighborhood in Arkansas. This is the result of a tar sand oil pipeline oil spill. This is someone's backyard. This area is still contaminated. This was April of last year. But new pipelines being built in Canada to carry the same stuff, brand new ones, are bursting even more than they're bursting here because they simply aren't and can't build them safe enough to carry to deal with the volatility of this type of oil, which requires acids essentially to make it so that it can move through pipe. And guess what the acid does? It eats the pipe. And that's not even talking about this Bakken crude, which is more flammable and more volatile, and I don't even want to think about moving that stuff through pipelines. Trains are scary enough. Okay. I think I have just one last slide and my time's up. However, there is an answer. We don't need this stuff. We really don't. So the United Nations has said, and the climate experts of the world have agreed, that in order to avert the worst of climate catastrophe, we have to leave at least 3/4 of existing fossil fuels in the ground. So if we want to save our climate, and if we want to have healthier choices for our communities, and we want to avoid moving this last remnants of what's left of their products around, we just have to choose to leave it in the ground, not have it move through here, not produce it, not move it, and come up with much healthier alternatives. And Los Angeles just voted, the city council voted unanimously, to ban all fracking in Los Angeles. So they're banning it at the root, and we can ban it at the transport. Thank you very much, and I'll answer your questions at the end.